Good evening and welcome once again to the Tzemach Bible Institute program. I'm John Klein, and with us as usual is Ken Garrison, pastor of Fellowship Church and founder of the Tzemach Bible Institute. Good evening, Ken.
Good evening, John.
Ken, tonight's question, it's almost a scary question, actually. Are we about to see, the Gog and Magog war that Ezekiel saw almost 2,700 years ago?
Well, John, I believe so. We are seeing prophecy fulfilled virtually every day. World leaders all around us seems to be either ignorant or don't care, unconcerned. I think they have attributed biblical prophecy to just myths or just idle speculation or whatever, and they don't recognize, I guess, that they're fulfilling it day by day. So I think we're very close to that.
Well, it's mind-boggling. Tonight we are going to look at the various beasts mentioned in Revelation 13 to 20, and we want to give an interpretation of these beasts and see that with current events. Try to get a handle, not a superficial handle like prophecy experts have been doing for, 50 years. We believe we're down to the wire, and we're right here, Ken. So
that certainly is the case. We're going to look at the portrayal that John gives us in the book of Revelation, and we're seeing something that's visible, and we want to call your attention to it. It requires discernment. But then that's part of what the Holy Spirit grants us, and so we believe that we're going to apply some discernment to see some events happening, and we believe that we have an example right before us of like an invisible shadow government that is overriding the president himself and dictating policy. So with that in mind, we want to call your attention to the Scripture and then begin to develop this thesis. Stay with us as we consider this because what we're talking about, we believe, as John said, is we're down to the wire. It is relevant, and it's painful even to talk about it, but we must.
We don't want to perish for lack of knowledge. That seems to be the biblical theme. So let's read. I want to read the first 6 verses of Revelation 17. And one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I shall show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made to drink with the wine of her immorality. And he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns."
Now, John, let me interrupt just for a second, just to point out. I mean, some of the symbolism here will tend to lose us. The beast that John's reading about is often referred to as the Antichrist government, a global Antichrist government. So don't get carried away too much in the description of the thing. It's a global Antichrist government is what we're talking about.
Right.
So John, if you would continue, please.
Okay. "And the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality. And upon her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered greatly."
And again, John, 2 things I want to focus on. I know you're going to outline the meaning of this, but first of all, the harlot was sitting on this beast. The Antichrist government is portrayed as an animal, like you might consider a horse, and the beast is riding, and that is directing or riding and direct. We want to focus on that concept today. And secondly, this harlot is drunk with the blood of the saints and the witnesses of Jesus. Now, if or the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus, we're talking about two groups of people here. The witnesses of Jesus, we know. Now, who are the saints?
The saints have to be Israel then. There's no other...
nobody else.
Right. In Revelation 12, it's those who have the testimony of Jesus and or Israel's other offspring.
Right. So it's people of biblical faith.
Right.
Is who this harlot is chewing up. All right, now John's going to describe what we believe is the interpretation of these.
From 13 to 17 and 18 and 19 in the book of Revelation, we have a regular beast. Now, this beast that we just spoke about, if we go back to Daniel 7, a beast is defined as a governmental form, a kingdom. So then we have a secular man-made beast or man-ruled beast, Satan-inspired, Satan-empowered, but man-ruled. So the first beast is a government, a man's government. The second beast, then, is a religious beast. It looks like the lamb, but sounds like a dragon.
Right.
So it looks like Christianity or institutional Christianity, and we would just say then it's apostate Christianity and Islam. And any other apostate religion. It'll be broad-based, but it'll be, whatever it is, we'll say this first beast, the man-made beast, is, it supports it. Listen to the man-made beast. And what is the man-made beast doing? And the harlot? Chewing up the people of God, people of faith. So this religious beast, the false prophet. And then the third one in our story is the harlot. Well, what does a harlot do? It's enticing. The harlot is something that lures you. Now, if we go by Revelation 18 and we see who's hurt when that harlot is destroyed, it's merchants, it's the transportation industry, bankers, the leaders of the earth. It says kings, but means the leaders of the earth. So we're talking about international commerce, multinational corporations. So the harlot is international commerce, national corporations that's manipulating or riding this secular government supported by apostate religions.
Okay. Now, if we were to look at this and apply it in a practical sense to our situation today, first of all, we would say that we do not believe that any of these beasts that John has cited are fully developed, but I think that we see them in the process of developing.
Right.
And now we all know that the United States today is referred to as the lone superpower, and also we have a global government, the United Nations, and actually the United Nations was formed, basically penned by the United States itself, the State Department. At any rate, we believe that in the future the two will merge with much more robust power than is presently being exerted, and will evolve into this Antichrist government system. The harlot, as John pointed out, are the multinational corporations, international commerce, international commercial concerns that really is driving policy. And that's what we want to illustrate today. Because it's a rare opportunity, just through the current events of things that are happening all about us, we can actually see what is normally invisible to us, but we can actually see the harlot pulling the reins of this beast government. Now, the religious system, we're talking about apostate Christianity, perhaps apostate Islam and other apostate religions. And we believe that we will yet see the emergence of something that is often referred to as united religions, or something, a religious organization that's global, that is patterned in the same structural pattern as the United Nations. So that has not fully emerged yet, but we believe we're on the verge of that just by what we see taking place.
Okay. Now, policy, we saw something obviously drastic, nationally changing our whole philosophy in this country after 9/11. President Bush initiated the war on terrorism. We were all for assisting him and in agreement with the war on terrorism. Initially, the first steps of the war on terrorism was attacking Afghanistan and eliminating the Taliban fundamentalist government there and eliminating Al-Qaeda. And initially we were very successful in starting this war on terrorism.
Yes, that is true. Now, in addition to the war in Afghanistan, as you pointed out, an additional objective of the war on terror was the effort to divide the Muslim world and in the process isolate the nation of Iran. Iran has, since the fall of the Shah, Iran has been the primary sponsor of terrorism across the globe, and so the United States moved to isolate Iran. We have a visual that we use from time to time that shows the whole Arab world, and in that we see U.S. forces deployed in Afghanistan, U.S. forces deployed in Iraq, isolating Iran, and of course the naval fleet in the Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf. Basically, Iran is surrounded. Now, Syria also is a problem state, a sponsor of state terrorism, and of course, with U.S. forces in Iraq, Syria is sandwiched between Israeli forces and U.S. forces in Iraq. So the policy of the war on terrorism was to divide the Muslim world and in particularly attempt to isolate Iran.
Okay, Ken, I'm actually going to throw a curveball at you right now. Is there a difference between moderate Islam and radical jihadic Islam?
Well, I think at the initiation of the so-called war on terrorism, Mr. Bush, the Bush administration, attempted very strongly to make such a differentiation. I don't believe that there is such a thing. I think Islam, unless it's apostate, it's jihadic.
Right. You know, lately there's been Muslim women and men, and we're not sure. Some of the men we know are born-again Christians now. All of these people were Muslims, and every one of them says there's no difference between moderate Islam and radical Islam. They said it doesn't exist. Radical Islam is just Quranic Islam. It's just
absolutely
they're following the Quran.
The Quran expressly sets forth the case for jihad, for violence, for the very things that Al-Qaeda and the Iranians are pursuing. The Quran straightforwardly promotes
initially, and maybe that's why, because we weren't honest about the thing, and how good are we going to do with a dishonest policy? Originally, there were great successes in Afghanistan and in Iraq, but now it seems, Ken, we've bogged down in Iraq, and some are questioning even why we went in the first place. Obviously, we believe there were weapons of mass destruction. They didn't find any. Whether they hustled them out of the country into Syria or buried them, there's all kinds of conditions or theories. But at any rate, as you pointed out in the map, Ken, the isolating Iran was a main objective anyway, even though it wasn't stated. If we just look at the map, we have to believe that was a main objective.
Sure. The argument that we shouldn't have gone into Iraq because no weapons of mass destruction were found is just simply disingenuous. That was never the objective in the first place. The objective was divide the Muslim world, make a separation between so-called moderate and jihadic Islam, and isolate Iran.
Right.
And now that, as you pointed out, there were some initial successes, but now the thing has drug on 5 years, and support for that has
waned
diminished,
terribly,
come down to the point where I guess there is no real, or very little real
support. Even the great supporters said we botched the whole deal.
Now, with that in mind, it is in such a setting now. After 5 years and thousands of casualties, and the ability, perseverance of the United States or the people have been tested now. We see now the evidence of the shadow government that we are talking about today. We see some forces behind the scene, like the harlot riding the beast. Some forces behind the scene that are directing policy and literally overriding presidential policy.
Okay.
And so that seems to be evident, and it really came to focus after the November elections of last year, and with the defeat of the Republicans. They lost both houses, or control of both houses. It seems, and at the same time there was the issuing of the so-called Baker-Hamilton Iraqi Study Group plan. That it seems evident that Mr. Bush now is just being bypassed.
Okay, now let's look at who Mr. Baker is. Mr. Baker was a chief policy advisor in the first Mr. Bush's White House, and he was the biggest anti-Israel guy in the government. And so he's heading up a study group to see how they could settle things in the Middle East with Mr. Hamilton. So they had a Republican and a Democrat. And Mr. Bush, as you said, totally ignored their recommendations. And now, well, saying he's ignoring him or not going to follow him, and now he seems to be doing everything. And not only that, who did he hire to take Mr. Rumsfeld's place? Well, a guy named, not Bill Gates, but Robert Gates, who was on that Baker-Hamilton commission. So he is the author, along with Mr. Baker, of the recommendations. And he's hired. Why would George Bush hire a guy that he didn't agree with any of his recommendations about?
Well, I think the point is that Mr. Bush's options here have just ended. And we see the evidence of someone behind the scene and headed by James Baker and this committee, but somebody reaching over and exerting policy. The day after the election, Mr. Rumsfeld was fired, and even though Mr. Bush, as you say, verbally rejected the recommendations of the Iraqi Study Group plan, he immediately began to implement and hired immediately the spokesman for that group, Robert Gates, as his Secretary of Defense. He sent Mrs. Rice to Israel almost immediately, within a few days, and to announce. We know now that she went to Israel to tell Mr. Olmert, here's what you have to do.
Here's what you will do.
Here's what you will have to do. And the final statement and is yet to be published, and we're reaching out a little bit, speculating a bit here, but yesterday's Monday Sentinel talked about the military in Iraq was studying their options, and among those options have to be a retreat. So we believe that retreat in conjunction with the Iraqi Study Group, the Baker-Hamilton Group plan, U.S. is going to retreat from Iraq.
So is this all the demands of the harlot? I mean, is this the multinational corporations riding the beast?
Sure.
Behind that? So money is what counts, and Saudi oil and whatever?
Sure.
Because if we come right down to it, here's a despicable lie. You heard of the roadmap, didn't you? Well, it originally had a different name. It was exactly the same, but the original name was the Saudi Peace Plan. Now, think about it. Have you ever read anything that Saudi Arabia had any good intentions to Israel? No, absolutely not. So if there was a Saudi Arabian peace plan, now called the roadmap, its aim is the destruction of Israel. And in order to implement it and get Saudi backing and Saudi oil and Saudi money, and however you're looking at it, Israel is the price that they're willing to pay.
Okay. Now, I want to make one final point, coming back just a bit to Mr. Bush being just simply bypassed. And I want to focus a second on Mr. Cheney. This policy in the war on terrorism, to a large degree, has been attributed to Mr. Cheney, as well as Mr. Rumsfeld and Mr. Wolfowitz and others. Mr. Cheney is still very vocal in support of the original goals and so on, the war on terrorism. And he continues to be vocal in that he just spoke to a conference this week and was very vocal. We believe that if he doesn't quieten down on that, I believe personally he'll be eliminated in one form or another. Maybe that will be through scandal or some perceived scandal, or even more violently radical than that. That's something
he didn't get the message yet.
He didn't get the message
He's not
yet.
following orders.
And so I want you to take note of that and just see in the weeks and months ahead, if Mr. Cheney continues to be vocally opposed to this thing, what might take place. So we're talking about this harlot is drunk on the blood of the saints, and so we're talking about some.
That's right.
We're talking about some critters that are able to destroy.
All right. So the first thing in this wonderful Saudi peace plan is the giving back the. Listen, there has been no recognition of the Arabs to accept Israel. They still want to drive the Jews into the sea. There's been no change for the last 150 years. The truth of the matter is that the things that are supposed to be implemented now and that we might see is the Golan Heights going back to Syria, the Judean Samaria going back to the Palestinian, Palestinians.
Don't say going
I'm sorry,
back.
You're right. It was never under Palestinian control. In fact, to be honest, there's no such people as the Palestinians. And that's another story. But so we see the old city of Jerusalem, biblical Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, so-called East Jerusalem, will be under Palestinian control. The heartland of Israel. They're
certainly demanding control of the Temple Mount, and that's going to be their demand. Now, there's one other provision of the Saudi plan, John, and that is the so-called right of return of the Palestinians. And if this provision were to be implemented, that means that there are millions of Arabs that would claim their Palestinian heritage and flood and effectively demographically end the state of Israel. And that is exactly the Saudi plan. We read all the time about the Prime Minister or President, whatever he is, of Iran wanting to wipe Israel off the map. The Saudis are just as determined to do so. They just do not have a nuclear weapon in their hand to do it with.
Right. And so they're just a little more deceptive. I always said Mr. Abbas was Yasser Arafat with a shave. Same beast.
That's right, and it's more subtle because the Saudis are intent on using the United States as the instrument of destruction of Israel and not directly as Ahmadinejad wants to do.
So what are the likely results of all this mess before we get you depressed and you want to slit your wrists? Well, we don't understand how Mr. Olmert is still in power, even after this failed attempt at beating back regathering the kidnapped Israeli soldiers. All of that thing that happened in Lebanon accomplished absolutely nothing. So we might say that Mr. Olmert will be thrown out of office. Sooner or later, there has to be an Israeli government.
He still has a 3% approval rating.
We read last week that he has a 3% approval rating. We're laughing, but it's sad. It's sad. The politicians in Israel, the secular politicians, don't want the government to collapse. They could collapse the government because they'll lose their jobs. So it's the country's going down the tubes. But we believe there's going to be another government who will not commit national suicide. Israel must reject the Saudi plan and will reject the Saudi plan. And the result of that will be universal condemnation of Israel and eventually an attack that Ezekiel saw, the Gog and Magog war. If you read Ezekiel 38, it looks like the local Arab nations and then piling on with everybody else leading to Armageddon. We think we're close. Otherwise, Israel will be wiped off and wiped off the face of the map. We believe God won't let that happen. We believe the Bible says it will not happen. And therefore, there has to be a change in the Israelis to earn the condemnation of the world. They have to stop compromising and committing national suicide.
Oh, I think
sooner or later. That's that.
No. I think it's very, very soon. They're going to be called into a conference by as early as May or June of this year. And I think when that comes out politically in Israel, the government will collapse. The people will demand it, and a more militant government will arise, although it won't have much approval from the world. Now, we talked about the Saudis, their effort to destroy the land of Israel and use the United States in the process of doing that, rather than lobbing a nuclear weapon over like Ahmadinejad would like to do. Well, Joel, the prophet Joel, spoke very directly concerning the nation that would decide to divide up God's land. John, would you read that?
So God says in verse 1, when he restores the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, he's going to gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, the valley where the God of Israel is judge. He's going to enter into judgment with them there on behalf of his people and his inheritance Israel. I like that. Mm-hmm. God's people and God's inheritance, whom the nations have scattered among the nations, and they have divided up my land. Every peace plan is from the pit of hell, because all of them have demanded Israel give up land, divide the land. Land for peace is not God's peace plan. It's from the pit of hell.
Absolutely. And our nation is in the process of being used to accomplish that very goal. And if that happens, there is going to be an awful, severe judgment come upon this nation, upon your children and grandchildren. Now, Spirit-filled Christians are the only ones that has enough discernment to realize what's going on. We pray that our program tonight has been able to bring some discernment on this situation, and that you might enter into prayer and activity in opposition to that thing. That's our program for tonight. We want to invite you to come out on April the 5th. We have a community Passover Seder during the Christian Holy Week, and so we want to invite you to join us on that. That's our program for tonight. Shalom.